ceremonies for today's international seminar on the Indus Waters Treaty, an instrument of peace and regional stability. On behalf of the Institute of Regional Studies and Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's seminar. We are deeply honoured by your presence and grateful that so many distinguished policymakers, diplomats, academics and practitioners and experts have joined us today to discuss one of the most consequential questions confronting South Asia today. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indus Waters Treaty remains one of the world's most consequential transboundary water agreements, not only because it allocates rights and obligations across the Indus Basin, but also it puts in place a mechanism to prevent water from becoming a permanent trigger for conflict. In recent years, the treaty's cooperative routines have come under sustained strain. Pakistan has documented reduced cooperation on mandated inspections, incomplete data exchange, and the erosion of regular Commission engagement. Developments that weaken the very safeguards designed to manage differences before they escalate. India's announcement on the 23rd of April 2025 to place the treaty in abeyance raises a number of legal and humanitarian concerns. This seminar is aimed at looking at the challenges ahead and examining what can be done to maintain consolidating a law-grounded perspective that highlights the treaty's architecture and wider regional stability. Session 1 will assess the treaty's design, legal durability and options for dispute settlement, and will highlight why preserving the IWT is essential for peace and stability in South Asia. Session 2 will evaluate the issues of not carrying out cooperative inspections and the sharing of hydrological data, and its implications for disaster risk, food security and water weaponization. The seminar aims to produce practical recommendations to ensure that the treaty works with a view to preserve peace and protect the lives and livelihoods that depend on the Indus Basin. With this brief introduction, we can now formally start today's seminar. It is now my privilege to invite Mr. Atta Tarar, the Honourable Federal Minister for Information and Broadcasting, to deliver the inaugural address. As the government's principal spokesperson, Mr. Tarar has led national communication on major public policy issues and played a central role in articulating Pakistan's positions on matters of national importance, governance and international engagement. Minister, the floor is yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Honourable Minister for Defence, Khwaja Muhammad Asif Sahib, Honourable Khurram Dastagir Sahib, former Federal Minister, Lieutenant General Amir Riaz Sahib, Ambassador Johar Salim Sahib, Mr. Ahmed Bilal Sufi Sahib, Meher Ali Shah Sahib, the Indus Water Treaty Commissioner, our esteemed guests from abroad, I would like to formally welcome Dr. Victor Gao, Madam Roxalana Zigon, Madam Laurie Watkins, and of course today's host, Madam Tania Francis. Honourable Ambassadors, Your Excellencies, celebrities from all across Pakistan, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. It is my distinct honour and privilege to address this seminar today on the theme of Indus Water Treaty, an instrument of peace and regional stability. Today, we are not merely discussing a treaty. We are discussing the lifeline of more than 240 million people of Pakistan. When we identify ourselves as Pakistanis, we ask a question as to who we are. And if you go back into history, the Indus water civilization defines us as a people. Whenever I go abroad, I often tell my counterparts that we are the people of the Indus Valley civilization. Our identification is that we are people based on the banks and tributaries of the mighty river Indus. And as they say, water is life. And Indus has given life to Pakistan. So when we say that Indus is our lifeline, And our people, the 240 million people of Pakistan, have an inalienable right to the water of Indus. We mean it from the core of our heart. For Pakistan, as I said, water is not simply a resource. It is a matter of life itself. The Indus River system, for thousands of years, nurtured one of the world's oldest civilizations. From the towering peaks of Gilgit-Baltistan to the fertile plains of Punjab and Sindh, these waters have connected our people across geography and history. The story of Pakistan is in many ways the story of the Indus. It is for this reason that the Indus Waters Treaty of 1960 occupies such a unique place in international relations. Signed under the auspices of the World Bank, the treaty has endured wars, political upheavals, prolonged periods of tensions. Its resilience for more than over 6 decades demonstrates an enduring truth that cooperation, dialogue, and adherence to international commitments remains the only sustainable path to peace. The treaty stands as a remarkable example of rule-based international order. It embodies the principle of good faith, pacta sunt servanda, the sanctity of agreements and peaceful dispute resolution. These are not merely legal concepts. They are foundations upon which trust is built. But ladies and gentlemen, as our national leadership has made it very clear, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, Field Marshal Saeed Asim Munir, the Honorable Minister for Defence on various occasions has made it clear that the people of Pakistan have a right to the water of the Indus, and the Indus Water Treaty cannot be amended, revoked, suspended, or held in abeyance because it cannot be done unilaterally. This pact came into being after mutual consensus, and only mutual consensus can lead to any amendment or revision. India's failed attempt at unilaterally holding in abeyance this treaty has led to international embarrassment for India at various forums, including legal forums. So when an attempt is made, or a one-sided attempt is made to hold this treaty in abeyance, the moral, social, legal foundations of that attempt are extremely weak. And any structure which has weak foundations will fall flat on its face. Ladies and gentlemen, at a time when climate change is accelerating, glaciers are melting at unprecedented rates, and water scarcity is becoming one of the defining challenges of our era. Hence, the need to protect this treaty is of the essence. And a need was felt to bring international experts together on this forum today to speak about the sanctity
चलें सिंतास माहिदी से मुतालिक आलमी सेमिनार मुख्तलिफ ममालिक के मंदूबीन ने शिरकत की। वफाकी वज़ीर इत्तलात अता तारर खिताब कर रहे थे। कहा कि वादी सिंध की तहजीब हमारी शनाख्त है, हम अपनी असीम तहजीब के वारिस हैं। पाकिस्तान के लिए पानी कुदरती वसीला नहीं, जिंदगी का मसला है।
That nature recognizes no boundaries and that humanity's shared challenges demand shared solutions. Any attempt to block or stop water will always fail because water will always find a way. The weaponization of water or attempts to unilaterally alter established arrangements undermine not only regional peace and stability, but also the broader framework of international law. International agreements, as I said, cannot be suspended or disregarded at convenience. Respect for treaties is indispensable for maintaining confidence among nations and preserving global order. Pakistan has consistently demonstrated its commitment to peaceful engagement and constructive dialogue and the faithful implementation of the treaty. But if an attempt is made to stop the water of Pakistan effectively to restore the water for the people of Pakistan. As the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, we also recognize the critical role of media and strategic communication in this context. In an age marked by misinformation and disinformation, it is imperative that the facts prevail over false narratives and truth triumphs over propaganda. Responsible media discourse can contribute significantly to fostering understanding, promoting peace, and reinforcing confidence-building measures. Distinguished participants, this seminar brings together eminent policymakers, legal experts, academics, and practitioners from across the world. Your collective wisdom and your thoughts will undoubtedly enrich our understanding and generate valuable recommendations for preserving and strengthening this vital international instrument. Let us reaffirm today that we will, by all means, not only protect the sanctity of this treaty, but we will do all that we can to protect the inalienable right of the 240 million of people of Pakistan to the water of the Indus River. The waters of the Indus have flowed for millennia. They have witnessed transformation, generosity. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that these waters remain a symbol of peace and shared prosperity for generations to come. I would also like to commend the Institute of Regional Studies and all partner institutions who have made this event possible today. And we collectively resolve today that we will do all that we can at all international forums, legally and otherwise, to ensure that the right to water of the Pakistani people is not only protected, but the world gets to see the attempts being made, the illegal attempts being made by India to alter or change this treaty, which it cannot do. And the right to water shall all, most of them who rely on agriculture for their livelihood and across Pakistan. So I think agriculture is the backbone of our country, and we are faced with challenges like climate change, but we must resolve today that this treaty shall prevail, and Pakistan stands firm in its determination to protect the livelihoods and the lives of the people of Pakistan, which are linked to the Indus River. Thank you very much. Pakistan Zindabad.
सिंतास माहिदे पर बैनुल-अक़वामी सेमिनार सिंतास माहिदे से मुतालिक आलमी सेमिनार का इनेकाद किया गया। मुख्तलिफ ममालिक के मंदूबीन ने शिरकत की। वफ़ाक़ी वज़ीर इत्तलात अता तारर तकरीब से ख़िताब कर रहे थे। कहा कि वादी सिंध की तहज़ीब हमारी शनाख्त है, हम अपनी असीम तहज़ीब के वारिस हैं। पाकिस्तान के लिए पानी कुदरती वसीला नहीं, ज़िंदगी का मसला है। दरियाए सिंध का निज़ाम कदीम तहज़ीबों में से एक है और उसकी आबियारी करता है। ज़राअत क़ौमी मईशत का बुनियादी सतून और दरियाए सिंध शहरक है। 6 दहाइयाँ कबल 2 ममालिक ने एक गैर मामूली फ़ैसला किया। फ़ैसले के नतीजे में सबसे पायदार आबी माहिदों में से एक वजूद में आया। आपको बताएं कि भारत ने माहिदे को एकतरफा तौर पर मुअत्तल करने की कोशिश की है और पानी हमारी ज़िंदगी और रेड लाइन है, समझौता नहीं हो सकता।
Significance of the treaty while exploring why its continued implementation remains vital for regional peace and stability. To chair this session, it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Khurram Dastagir Khan, former Federal Minister for Defence, Energy, Commerce and Foreign Affairs, whose distinguished public service and extensive experience in governance makes him exceptionally well placed to lead today's discussion. Mr. Dastagir, may I invite you to kindly assume the chair? I would also like to invite distinguished panellists of Session 1 to please come to the stage. Mr. Syed Meher Ali Shah, Pakistan's Commissioner for Indus Waters. Mr. Shah oversees technical consultations, inspections, hydrological coordination and treaty implementation under one of the world's most significant transboundary water agreements. Our next distinguished speaker for this session will be Mr. Emma Bilal Sufi, former Federal Law Minister and one of Pakistan's foremost authorities on international law. As an internationally respected jurist and legal scholar, he has advised governments and international organisations on treaty law, state responsibility, constitutional affairs, and the peaceful settlement of international disputes. And our final speaker in this session is Dr. Roxolana Zigon, an eminent scholar who is head of the Scientific Centre of International and Strategic Studies at the University of World Civilizations in Moscow. Her research examines international security, geopolitical developments, humanitarian issues, and global governance, bringing a valuable comparative and international perspective to questions of regional peace and transboundary cooperation. Thank you for joining us. I now request the session chair to please commence the proceedings. Mr. Khurram Dastagir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much to Institute of Regional Studies, my dear friend Ambassador Johar Salim, for this very kind invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, we could not ask for a more relevant panel that Institute of Regional Studies has assembled for us this morning. Three very distinguished experts are here to enlighten us and to take this discussion further, which of course is highly legal and technical, but has other aspects that our eminent panelists will bring to the fore. So I'm delighted to invite to begin the proceedings the Indus Waters Commissioner of Pakistan, Mr. Meher Ali Shah, to come and give his remarks.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Honorable Federal Minister for Defense, Honorable Federal Minister for Climate Change, Honorable Federal Minister for the Information and the Broadcasting, distinguished defense leadership, respected Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, may I request to please display the presentation which I shared with the organizers? Yeah. So let me be clear. This is not going to be an engineering briefing alone. It is the first institutional statement after the inaugural and the keynote address. My purpose is to place the treaty's operating record before this forum. The Indus Waters Treaty is a conflict prevention system, whereas the Permanent Indus Commission is the mechanism that keeps that system alive. Next, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I will not duplicate the political keynote, the legal analysis, the humanitarian assessment, or the security discussion for that matter that will follow. My role is narrower, but essential. I'll place before this forum the operating record of the treaty, what the treaty requires, what Pakistan has done, and what happens when the routine channels are blocked. This is where the principle meets the practice. Next, please. For Pakistan, this is national security, not merely the hydrology. Flow predictability is not, ladies and gentlemen, a luxury of planning. It is part of the survival architecture of the state. When the lives and livelihoods of 240 million people are tied to the Indus Basin, when more than 80% of the arable land depends on these waters, which constitutes around 45 million acres of land, which is being irrigated by the canal waters, and that is a promise the state makes with the farmers. When agriculture contributes almost a quarter of GDP and 1/3 of them, water uncertainty becomes the national uncertainty. Pakistan's restraint has been deliberate, but water, food, livelihood, and social stability are not negotiable abstractions. That is why Pakistan has publicly defined the strategic threshold for any attempt to stop or divert the treaty waters belonging to Pakistan. Next, please. The treaty converted a territorial river system into a legal architecture by way of limiting, fixing and delimiting the rights and obligations of the parties owed to each other. The eastern rivers were, so we all know, allocated to India, whereas the western rivers, the Indus, the Jhelum and the Chenab, were placed under the general rule of Pakistan's unrestricted use, with India's uses confined to carefully defined exceptions. Pakistan accepted that bargain, rebuilt its irrigation life around that bargain. That is very important. And planned its national water economy on the assurance that the western rivers would be let flow. The bargain remains the bargain. It was not a favor, it was a binding settlement, binding on both the parties. Next, please. You can see on the screen that how this treaty serves as a conflict prevention design. Ladies and gentlemen, the treaty is basically engineering for peace, which works because the four elements operate together: the allocation, the cooperation, the institution, and the dispute control. Allocation tells each side that what it may use and what it may not use. Cooperation provides data, notice, and inspection. And the Commission gives a regular channel of communication, whereas the Article 9 gives a safety valve when questions cannot be settled bilaterally. You just remove one element and the peace function starts to fail. Therefore, the abeyance is not a diplomatic slogan. We need to understand that it is an attempt to disable the stabilizing architecture. Next, please. Next. Now I would come to the Article 8 of the total 12 articles of the treaty, which makes the Commission, the Permanent Indus Commission, the treaty's early warning system. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not a mailbox or a post office. It is, in fact, the operating mechanism that keeps water out of conflict. The Commission converts suspicion into data, and data into verification, and verification into the settlements. Regular meetings, tours, project information, Article 6 data, special inspections, and the annual reports are not merely the rituals or formalities. They are the treaty's first safety device. When the Commission is blocked, consequently, the first stage of dispute avoidance is blocked. Next, please. Now coming to one of the most important articles of the treaty, that is Article 9. And this is the article which, I have no inhibition to say that bites more to India, because this is basically not a courtroom afterthought. This is basically one of the articles of the treaty which provides a very, elaborate dispute resolution mechanism, which starts, at a bilateral level, at the Commission level, and in case the bilateral level settlement does not, succeed, then it allows, without any paralysis, to move on to the third forum. So it is a progressive ladder, and it begins with questions before the Commission. If a question cannot be resolved, the treaty provides structured routes toward a neutral expert or a court of arbitration. The sequence is deliberate: institutional settlement first, third-party determination where necessary, but no paralysis. And Pakistan has used this ladder in past and also presently. The point to be highlighted is that non-response cannot be allowed to destroy the ladder. Next, please. And now comes the Court of Arbitration, which basically stems out of the Article 9 of the treaty. And the Court of Arbitration has basically strengthened the legal certainty. The court did not weaken the treaty, it basically reactivated the treaty. If we see simply towards the history of the implementation of the treaty, we can see that ever since India started the development of its works on the western rivers, and that was basically started at a very fast pace from the year starting 2000. So there has always been a discord between the parties, and eventually in 2016 Pakistan decided that now is the time to have the general interpretation of the Indus Waters Treaty, particularly the provisions which govern the development by India on the western rivers. So the Court of Arbitration's rulings, we are fortunate that we received 2 awards from the Court of Arbitration, one last year in the month of August, and the second, which was a supplemental award, so this year, a month before. So the court's rulings on competence, may those be the matters related to competence or the general interpretation or the specific design issue of maximum pondage, the court has confirmed 4 essential points to be noted. First, that India's non-appearance before the court does not paralyze the proceedings. Second, the abeyance posture does not deprive the court of competence. And third, the awards are final, binding and controlling. And India must let flow the western rivers with treaty exceptions applied strictly. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a political rhetoric, and it is no more a Pakistan's position paper. It is the treaty speaking through its own court. Next, please. So let's talk about, in specific terms, about the awards, that, how these awards operationalize the terms of the treaty. The court's award translate the legal obligations into the operational discipline. Like the let flow is the general rule for the western rivers and an obligation for India to fulfill. And run-off river hydropower is permitted to India only within the Article 3 and Annexure D, and pondage must be realistic. Installed capacity of the new run-off river hydroelectric plants and their anticipated load cannot be inflated to create the operational discretion by way of inflating the pottage. Minimum downstream flow obligations and the environmental concerns must be respected. This is what the court has said. And Pakistan does not object, ladies and gentlemen, to the lawful hydropower. Lawful hydropower is not the problem for Pakistan, but, and it's a very big part, that the unlawful control, excessive discretion, and the opaque operation are the problem. Next, please. Now I would share briefly that how Pakistan has kept the channel alive despite India's posturing of abeyance. Starting from the year 2025 and 26, the treaty year, which ended on 31st of March this year, the record is basically institutional. Pakistan kept the channel alive. I share it with full responsibility. Pakistan continued to provide the required data. Pakistan sent correspondence. Pakistan requested meetings, inspections, project information, and Article 9 consultations. Pakistan also prepared and transmitted the draft annual report, even in the exception circumstances, but there has been no response from the other side. On the other side of the record, before 2025, when India announced to hold the treaty in abeyance, we also see a similar pattern from the Indian side, and that was that there has been no commission meeting after May 2022, no general or special tour of inspection. Corresponding monthly data has remained outstanding after August 2023, and multiple core treaty communications have received no response. This is precisely what increases the risk of the avoidable escalation. Next, please. Now, what happens when data stops? The hydrological information, ladies and gentlemen, is not a diplomatic courtesy. It is an operational necessity. Without data, the downstream state is forced to guess whether it faces nature or the upstream operation. Only last night, I have been writing to my Indian counterpart when I observed significant fluctuations in the flows of Chenab yet again for the fourth time since last year, April 2025. That is not a technical inconvenience. It is a strategic hazard. Flood forecasting windows shrink, irrigation scheduling becomes uncertain at the sowing stage particularly, barrage and reservoir operations lose the predictive confidence, technical verification is displaced by strategic doubt. Therefore, there is no brainer in understanding that the data sharing is the line between the natural risk and the manufactured vulnerability. Next, please. As I just discussed about the manipulations of the flows of Chenab at Marala, so the Chenab episodes required answers. I will state this carefully and without overclaiming causation. These events required explanation and operational data, and we have been asking to India. Pakistan asked for that through the treaty channels, and ladies and gentlemen, there is no response from the Indian side, and the non-response creates the risk. When flows at Marala moved from a peak of 78,000 cusick to only 1,500 cusick in May 2025, when December 2025 shows a movement from 58,000 cusick down to 870 cusick, and when May 2026 records a sharp fall within the event window, no responsible downstream commissioner can treat that as a routine and move on. These are precisely the events the Commission exists to examine, with data, inspection, and consultation. Next, please. Now I would like to show you a pattern, that how the pattern matters. Ladies and gentlemen, the issue is not hydropower for Pakistan. The issue is basically accumulated upstream control without the treaty discipline. The discipline which has been enshrined into the treaty as its fundamental core. You can see on the map, all the red boxes are the ones which have put now the western rivers and particularly the Chenab under stress. Starting from Marala barrage, upstream, you can see that India has started reopening of its low-level outlets, and what would happen in simple terms, that by way of so doing, so India will have a control by way of, emptying the reservoir and refilling, and then basically repeating these, manipulations just to the detriment of Pakistan, which is, by the way, only 70 kilometers downstream of Salal. And the story does not stop. This basically leads to a pattern where India is going to construct its Sawalkot hydropower. The Ratle is presently under construction. Similarly, 1,000 megawatt Pakaldol is under construction. Kiru and Kawar are with the same status. And now India has started to develop the Chenab-Beas link, so which has a potential to divert the water of 1.9 million acre feet. So as I have been trying to articulate, that the major issue, the core issue, is basically accumulated upstream control without the treaty discipline. One project may be a question in terms of the Article 9, but a cluster of accelerated works with no data, no inspection, and no commission engagement, that becomes a strategic pattern. No more a question. So I have already explained briefly that what is going to happen with these projects. So Pakistan say yes to only lawful runoff river generation, but Pakistan of course says no to the unlawful control, diversion, opacity, and the failure to comply. Next, please. So coming to close my presentation, I would like to say something briefly about the diversion and the control. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the two issues which require a particular attention because they go to the character of the bargain. First, the reported Chenab Beas link. Pakistan's legal position is very clear, and that stems out from the Article 3, which governs the three western rivers and contains as such no freestanding category of the surplus western river waters available for diversion by India into an eastern river basin. Diversion changes the character of the bargain. The bargain, which is, at the core of the treaty, through which Pakistan agreed to forego and surrender its rights of the three eastern rivers. Second is the Salal, as I explained. And ladies and gentlemen, so there has been a bilateral agreement signed by the then, Indian Minister for External Affairs back in the year 1978, Mr. A.B. Vajpayee, and from Pakistan's side, it was signed by Pakistan's Foreign Minister Agha Shahid. That agreement required the outlet works to be permanently plugged, and those were plugged. Now, if removal is claimed to be necessary for a safety emergency, the agreement requires, immediate information, consultation, and site inspection. Alterations, essentially require the mutual agreement, and reopening low-level outlets changes the control, as I explained, posture of a project governed by a specific bilateral agreement. So the Commission must examine both before facts are created on the ground. But these facts are going to be created on ground, whereas there are no consultations. Next, please. Now, coming to the international record, Pakistan is not responding only through the speeches. Pakistan has used the international system responsibly. The Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister briefed the diplomatic corps and wrote to the President of the Security Council, the President of the General Assembly, and the Secretary General. And Pakistan's permanent representative to the UN transmitted the record to the Security Council and the India-Pakistan question, under the India-Pakistan question. And ladies and gentlemen, very importantly, to the vindication of Pakistan's position, UN Special Procedures mandate holders in October 2025 have publicly recognized serious human rights concerns comprising the water, food, livelihood, environment, and the development. We are taking the matter to the world not only to internationalize a quarrel, but to prevent a treaty breakdown from becoming a security crisis. Water is life and it cannot be weaponized. Next, please. Something about Pakistan's own water house. So, ladies and gentlemen, this point is equally important. Pakistan is not merely asserting the rights abroad. Pakistan is strengthening its own water house at home. Treaty rights and domestic reform are two sides of the same national water strategy. Pakistan is basically improving the water storage and regulation, the reservoir safety, sediment management, hydropark capacity, water accounting, telemetry, canal rehabilitation, groundwater discipline, climate resilience, and agricultural productivity. We are already on a national journey to protect every drop, measure every flow more accurately, and produce more value from the water we lawfully receive. The stronger Pakistan, of course, becomes at home, the clearer its message becomes abroad. We protect every drop we receive, and we will not accept coercion over any drop we are entitled to receive. Next. So this is the last slide of my presentation where I would like to highlight the significance and importance to restore the framework. The treaty's answer to this stress which we have been discussing so far and will be discussing in the remaining sessions of today's seminar is basically not the abeyance, it is performance. The way forward is very clear. An immediate commission meeting, full restoration of Article 6 data, general and special tours and inspections, project record disclosure, including the drawing standard documents, schedules, hydraulic designs, and operating rules, and Article 9 discipline, beginning with the commission examination and ending with respect for the courts of arbitration and the neutral expert. No unilateral abeyance, no data blackout, no diversion, no fait accompli. The Indus Waters Treaty is alive. The Commission must be therefore allowed to work. The architecture and the operating records are now before the seminar, and the legal, humanitarian, diplomatic, and security consequences will be addressed by the distinguished speakers who follow. So I thank you all.
In the order of service, we are honoured to have the presence of Mr. Musaddiq Masood Malik, who I'd like to invite to the stage. Federal Minister for Climate Change and Environmental Coordination. As an accomplished public policy practitioner, he's previously held key ministerial portfolios in petroleum and energy, and now leads national efforts on climate resilience, environmental sustainability, biodiversity conservation, and international climate cooperation. He should be with us shortly to give us his thoughts. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Yesterday I was doing a press talk and I told the crisis in the life of a man in Pakistan. A man, farmer, farming for about 7 to 8 generations, got devastated over the past 15 years. His name is Iqbal Solangi. He was a farmer. He got wiped out in the floods of 2010. He barely survived and came back to his farmland and got wiped out again in 2012. He left the farm for a while, tried to put food on the table for his children, and came back to farming once the water went down. And he was hit again in 2022. One flood after the other, his life got devastated. His livestock was washed away, his house was washed away, his children's schools was washed away, his family was displaced. And he finally gave up on farming and probably does some labor work somewhere in Karachi. Generations of farming lost to water. But what I didn't say yesterday is that Iqbal Solangi is not alone in this universe. If you look at the Bangladeshi farmers who wait for the water to flow, and if the water doesn't flow, then the fisherman starves and the farmer cannot farm. Same story. In Sahil, at Sahil, a woman walks about 4 miles one way to get 1 bucket of water every day. And she is to walk 4 miles because the river that flew next to her village has pulled back. And has pulled back because someone upstream has stopped the flow of the water. Every day she walks 4 miles to get 1 bucket of water to bring back to her children. This is what she did yesterday. This is what she's doing today. And this is what she would be doing tomorrow. This is not a crisis in her life. This is her life. This is her life. And the Niles and the Tigris marshes and the story of the once Aral Sea It's the same story. It's the exact same story of Iqbal Solangi. So not only is it the story of 120 million people in Pakistan who depend upon the farmlands, but it's a global story. In Africa, in Bangladesh, by the flows of Mekong, everywhere it is the same story. We look at this story either as floods or droughts. But what we don't look at it is that it's not just the story of floods or scarcity of water. It's the story of water that you do not control. The danger is not just too little water or too much water. The danger is that someone else who is not you controls the tap through which your water is going to flow. My dear friend Mazaaq Shah, my colleague, he just showed you a graph. One day, the water flowing through Marala was 1,500 cusics. Then it became 78,000 cusics. And then it fell down to 1,500 cusics. And not one drop of rain to explain that. So the only thing that explains this phenomenon is that someone else, who's not Iqbal Solangi, has his hand on the tap that controls his water. And who pays? About 50% of our population depends upon agriculture. That's give or take 120 million people. 120 million people's livelihood depend upon this water. About a quarter of our GDP and 100% of our food security depends upon the flow of this water. So, ladies and gentlemen, friends, this is neither a crisis of climate nor a crisis of water. This is a crisis of justice. And that's how we would like the world to see it. Solangi didn't build the dams. Solangi didn't break any treaty. Solangi didn't elect the man who controls the tap. And yet it's Solangi's life that gets devastated. This is the crisis of justice. And it's not just water tragedy. It's not just the water tragedy. I would like you to note that the same neighbor that controls this water flow or claims that it controls the water flows is the third largest polluter of the world, third largest. And let's make it simple. You pollute, greenhouse gases, temperatures rise, glaciers melt, downstream flooding. So the country that has created the furnace, which is burning the skies and burning the glaciers and affecting floods downstream, is the same country that then controls the tap, controls the flow of the water. Now, how just is that? You burn, you flood, and you know what that burning and flooding means for us? 6,000 people dead over the past 15 years. 6,000 people. 6,000 people haven't died in a single war. 19,000 people injured or disabled. And 40 million people displaced. 40 million, 40, larger than most countries in Europe. Displaced for months, for 6 months. And if they're displaced for 3 months, 90 days, given our demography, 1.8 billion school days are lost. Imagine your child not going to school for 1 month. 1.8 billion school days lost. Because someone else decides when the water is going to flow and flood you. Someone else decides when the water is going to be stopped to the extent that your soil cracks because of dryness and is rendered useless forever. Someone else decides that. That is the crisis that we are talking about today. We have a treaty for this. We call it Indus Water Treaty, which is why we are all here today. When you want to test law, you test the law at its weakest point, not the strongest point. And this treaty is one of the strongest treaties of the world, not the weakest treaty. Let me say it again. If you want to test a policy or you want to test a law, you test it at its weakest point where it breaks to make sure that the justice is delivered. Now here, this is the strongest treaty the world has seen. It has survived 3 wars between 2 nuclear powers. If this treaty doesn't hold, ladies and gentlemen, no treaty in the world is worth the weight of the paper on which it's published. No world order post Second World War holds today if this treaty doesn't hold. Because the order that we created after the Second World War, it all came out of these treaties. So what is the value of a treaty if one powerful country, and we don't consider them powerful, but one powerful country one day gets up and says, the treaty, well, it may well be, but it doesn't apply to me. And I unilaterally put it in abeyance or suspend it or walk out of it. This is what previously led to genocides. This is why the world came together and weaved itself into these web of treaties. And one of the strongest treaties in the world, one country just gets up and says it doesn't hold anymore. I always pronounce it wrong, and I have my very dear friend Amar Bilal Sufi. We go way back to school days. So I'm going to, in his presence, pronounce it wrong. What is it? Pacta sunt servanda? The treaties must hold. So my view is, ladies and gentlemen, it is not that the treaty has been suspended or put in abeyance. It is simply that the treaty has been revealed. And that's all there is to it. The treaty has not been put in abeyance. The treaty has been revealed to the world. Our friends went to the court, we went to the court, and the court upheld their point of view. I mean, there have been court has given mixed judgments. Sometimes they favored us, sometimes they favored our neighboring countries, and everyone said, all right, we'll go with whatever the international courts are saying. Now here the court passed a judgment and put limits on the technical design, on the flow of water, put natural limits and decided this is how it's going to be organized. No one country can unilaterally decide what the design is going to be. No one country is going to decide how they're going to stop the flow of water from one country to another. And guess what? The country got up and said, I don't accept the jurisdiction. I don't accept the jurisdiction? So what is the jurisdiction of international courts of justice? None. So does it mean tomorrow anyone can get up, any nuclear state can get up and say, hell be upon you, I don't accept your jurisdiction, I don't accept the world order, I don't accept treaties, I don't accept rights? I don't accept justice. I just don't accept. So, ladies and gentlemen, to me, the treaty has been revealed, and in that, all treaties of the world have been revealed. So this is not a message for us. We can take care of ourselves, as we have seen. No one can stop our water. But what about the rest of the world? If this precedent has been set, and if the new world order is in accordance with this new precedent, then what about the rest of the world, is my question. The water that flows through the Netherlands is French water, is Swiss water, and is German water before it becomes the Dutch water. So what about that? The water that goes to Portugal is Spain's water. What about that? So essentially, this new order that is being proposed is that no downstream country in the world has any water rights. This is not Pakistan's case. This is the case and test for water rights for all downstream billions and billions and billions of people who live downstream. It's a decision whether they're going to have, as our neighbors say, a drop of water flow through their country. That's the test that we're putting to the table today. Whether it's Hungarian Tietsa, which was poisoned in another country, or it's Niles, or it's Dunya, which goes through 19 different countries. Every country is downstream of some other country. So no country in the world after this has any rights to water. And no recourse either. Because any country can get up and say, I don't accept the jurisdiction. I do not accept the jurisdiction of this court. So this is a question that I put in front of all of you. Every other element of the world, you have organizations and laws that govern trade. You have organizations and laws that control nuclear proliferation. And you have no laws for water. You have no laws for agriculture, for food, for drinking water. What are you going to trade? What laws? So what am I urging us to do in our togetherness, all of the international experts today? No more declarations. It's tiring to go to these United Nations fora and come up with one declaration, non-binding declaration after another. There must be a covenant which has political consequences, which has economic consequences, which has diplomatic consequences. So rise now, or hold your peace forever.
Thank you very much. And thank you, my dear friend, Senator Dr. Musaddiq Malik, for burning the barn and waking us all up with his impassioned remarks, which were titled Treaty Disruption and Human Security. But now it is my pleasure to invite international law foundations, good faith, compliance and conflict prevention under the Indus Waters Treaty. Mr. Sufi.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Federal Minister for Climate Change, Honorable Federal Minister for Information, Honorable Chair, experts, diplomats, Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. The learned minister provoked some legal points, innovation. And I think when he said that the water, there is no right over water, if I can develop it further, basically there is no title to water of any state. If you remember, they are called global commons. The SDGs and international law treats space, air, water as a common heritage of mankind. That is exactly what 1982 Law of the Sea Convention tells us, that they are common heritage of mankind. So the waters flowing from the glaciers downwards towards states who could be upper, lower, or multiple states, no state can validly claim title of water. It's a common right. It has to be used by all. With this fundamental feature inherent, it is obvious that a water flowing from one country to another can't be stopped or diverted by its very nature. And that is one reason why we come to this conclusion that in all treaties that have been executed between upper and lower riparian, the just use principle or entitlement of use of water by each has been enshrined and codified. The Indus Water Treaty is no exception to it. So what Mr. Meher Ali Shah identified as Article 3, the core obligation, it links up in a jurisprudence sense with this equal use of water and absence of title to any country, to any state, that the water will be allowed to let flow into Pakistan without any interference. And the interference exceptions have been identified. And then, despite that, and what are those exceptions? Of course, despite those exceptions, you will let the water flow. And when you are making any hydro projects, any pondages, then you guarantee a low riparian through an Indus Water Treaty or any similar treaty that, look, we are making this pondage, this hydro project for our use in our territory that we need. There are people who require electricity. There are people for whose agriculture we require that. Don't you worry, your water will continue to flow. So that's the assurance, that's the guarantee implicit in the Indus Water Treaty, and that is why several projects were allowed to happen, and to ensure the engineering drawings were commented upon, discussed, even taken to judicial forums as and when required, but the very project itself was not criticized, was not pushed back by Pakistan. Now the situation has dramatically changed, ladies and gentlemen. In May last year, India says we are holding it in abeyance. Holding in abeyance from an international law point of view is an admission of a breach of a treaty. If you say, I'm holding a treaty in abeyance, you're fashioning a terminology away from the core obligations of the treaty. You're identifying a term which is stranger to the water law jurisprudence or even Vienna Convention and the laws of treaty, where either you would suspend or you would terminate, or you would at best not walk out of it, but use the exceptions within to argue your point of view. But if you are saying yourself that we are holding it abeyance to an international law, this is an admission of the breach of a bilateral treaty. For Pakistan, it holds the field, and we use its baseline to comment. That is strategy 1. The strategy 2 is that they are no longer linking this matter to the treaty formulation. The absence of good faith tells us Indians are linking it holistically to other issues that are again extraneous to the treaty. Terrorism, Terrorism is a matter that Security Council is already seized of by virtue of UNSC Resolution 1373, which forces obligations on non-member states to counter acts of terrorism through judicial process, legislation and executive action, and Pakistan has done that post-Mumbai. Most of these people who were suspected, their properties have been seized, they have been struggling, going to courts, asking for permissions to travel and so on, and their reports have been filed by Pakistan to CTC, Counter-Terrorism Committee, consistently. So Pakistan was then evaluated under FATF, and whatever deficiencies in law enforcement mechanism were to counter terrorism, they were fulfilled, whether they were SCCP framework, State Bank framework, and even Pakistan developed mutual legal assistance law just 2-3 years ago, the standalone MLA law. India, on the other hand, does not have MLA. So if Pahalgam happened, they only have one provision in their criminal procedure court entitling them to send requests to Pakistan for investigation or for cooperation in investigation. If Pahalgam when happened, the true course of action available to them was to write a letter to the state of Pakistan pursuant to 1273 and under Section 19 of the Mutual Legal Assistance Act of Pakistan, insisting that Pakistan provides relevant information, joint investigation, or whatever information that they had, pass it on to us and say, cooperate. Had we not cooperated, which we couldn't, we had to, whatever that meant at that point in time. But they chose, instead of lawfare, warfare. They decided they will attack Pakistan. And as part of the package, they announced a hostility environment between the state of Pakistan and state of India. Operation Sindoor is an operational term used by them. And when they say it is not over, the reason is, to me, as an international law person, it comes across as a situation of war is continuing from Indian side unilaterally on Pakistan, and Indus Water Treaty holding in its abeyance is a subset of that war strategy. They are launching this war from Afghanistan side, the proxies who come in. They're launching this war through other means by incorporating Kashmir territory. They're launching this war against other measures. And now IWT holding in abeyance is partially because, in their reckoning, since they have claimed the territory of the Kashmir under Article 370 pursuant to Presidential Order of 5th August 2019, and they have got it verified by the Supreme Court of India. So in their reckoning, they claim the territory over which Kashmir, over which Indus and other waters flow. And it is in their strategic calculation one way to dislodge IWT as well, remove it off. And when they do that, which they have done, it is a serious wrong under articles of state responsibility which were prepared by International Law Commission, which, and you can clearly demonstrate without much arguments that this holding in abeyance tantamounts to a serious international wrong which permits Pakistan countermeasures, both coercive and non-coercive in nature. Pakistan has been exercising restraint as much as it can. It will continue to do so. It will continue to exercise lawfare measures, which mean writing to the UN Security Council, to the P5 members, because it is no longer a treaty matter, ladies and gentlemen. It has become an issue of the UN Charter, where there is a threat to regional peace and security. So the jurisdictional mandate, apart from judicial apparatus under IWT, is now with the P5, is by with the Security Council and the Office of the UN Secretary General, because it is his office who has to take cognizance that a situation is deteriorating in subcontinent between two countries, and deteriorating fast. And there have been multiple efforts being made to salvage, and the state of Pakistan, through its ministers, its prime ministers, its military chief, has made it known to the global community that we will be left with no choice except to resort to certain measures that we don't want to. And in that case as well, in another seminar, we were discussing that yes, dams and dikes are traditionally protected sites under Geneva Convention Additional Protocol Article 1, Article 56, 52 to be specific, for the reason that mischief escapes from them and that causes a lot of damage to civilian property. But up to the point when the pondage is filled with water, the protection is not triggered. So you have a time zone of considering extreme actions that, as I said, Pakistan will be reluctant. So it's become an issue of the UN Charter that the situation between India and Pakistan is deteriorating fast, and the pretext remains IWT. It's a larger frame of an armed conflict that India has imposed upon us, and it is using various measures, and IWT continues to be a subset of that war framework. I also suggested in one of my write-ups, and we did it when the PMLN government was there last time in 2016, I believe, an idea of legal diplomacy between India and Pakistan. And the recommendation was we organized a seminar, and in that seminar we even invited people from the Indian High Commission, and we said that we issued several issues, Kashmir, Siachen, Sir Creek, have partially legal dimensions to them. Each issue has a legal angle to it. So let's legal sides on both the sides, legal team on both the sides, sit together and examine if they can hammer out various options from a legal point of view and then present it to the political leadership. But again, as I said, the responses do not seem to be. Through the rule book, what India has to also realize that if it moves away from the global rule book, the treaties that we are talking about are not 1, 2, 3. They are a stack of treaties, ladies and gentlemen. And if you go to the UN Treaty Series website, you will be taken aback that there are millions of treaties. They constitute the rule book of global order, not 1 or 2. The more you move away from the rule book of global order, the more you lose credibility and standing. The more you bear cost. President Trump, we remember when he said statements on Alaska and Canada, the cost was evident. The allies began to move away. So irresponsible attitude from the Indian side on a treaty which is otherwise known to be a boundary treaty, which is otherwise known to be given enhanced sanctity under Vienna Convention and customary norms, is that they are beginning to bear the cost of being alienated. And one reason why Pakistan is leading in the regional discussions and alternative dispute resolution mechanism is because Pakistan wants to behave as reasonably as possible, as legally correct as possible, and that is how its teams and its measures are responding to that. So my concluding remarks would be that there is absence of good faith on the part of our Indian neighbor, and we sense it very clearly. The biggest evidence is the holding in abeyance. The problem that people talk to us and they ask us in streets, in the courts where I move, in other events, that why is India doing all this? Why is that they don't understand? They have international lawyers. There is an Indian Society of International Law. So aren't they telling them that they are? And I say this has been politically driven. It was part of the agenda in 2016 when President Modi came to power. He talked about two distinct things. One was that we will remove Article 370 and then we will get rid of Indus Water Treaty as well. And that is how they are moving in that direction, irrespective of the legal inherent obligations that they have to face. So I'll stop here, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope that our neighbor senses this, that not only we have an obligation to let flow the water, we have an obligation also not to disturb the water flow, otherwise it will affect the agriculture, it will affect and inflict the possibility of starvation for which we will have dreadful consequences. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sufi, For our final panelist, we are honored to welcome the distinguished head of the Scientific Center for International and Strategic Studies at the University of World Civilizations, Moscow, the distinguished Professor Dr. Roxolana Zigon, Professor Zigon, who is going to enlighten us on IWT, Foundation for Peace and Security in South Asia, a foreign, legal and humanitarian perspective.
Dear guests, Honorable Minister of Information and Broadcasting, Minister of Climate and former Minister of Law of Pakistan, Mr. Sufi, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for having a unique opportunity to participate in this important event, which is aimed at discussing a completely new scenario that we're facing in relation to India and Pakistan relations and the role that the Indus Waters Treaty is playing in order to depict a new reality we are all standing in front of. Because the case that we are overviewing here is not connected just to the dispute, waters dispute, between Pakistan and India. As it was correctly marked by my colleagues before, it has to do with every state and every nation of the global community today. Unfortunately, we have been witnessing for the last years and decades a serious deterioration of the international relations system. And my colleagues have wonderfully described the failures that we have been observing in relation to the UN, to the international legal system, to address the burning issues of the modern days. While listening to the previous speeches, I have marked to myself a key word that I would like to carry forward. Mr. Sufi has mentioned the word faith, the lack of trust, the failures of the neighbor. And I would like to start my speech that I would like to address to the esteemed audience with the following words: faith, unity, discipline. Faith is the national motto of Pakistan, the guiding principle of Pakistani nationhood. It is derived from the principles laid down by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founding father of Pakistan. And I do believe that it's not accidental that this seminar is taking place in the Jinnah Convention Center, which has been hosting recently Islamabad peace talks that confirms and defines a special posture of Pakistan in direction of proclaiming and promoting diplomatic efforts for the global community. For 79 years since the day of liberation from the British rule and the establishment of the independent state of Pakistan in 1947, it has been falling for this vision of faith, unity and discipline, with the inner strength and courage. These principles were integrated in every drop of the Pakistani blood and its national DNA. It means that the Pakistani nationhood has succeeded to pass a historical resilience test and win a fight for sovereignty, self-identity and independence with dignity and strong vision. I have quoted these principles and placed them into privileged position as their perfect introduction to the topic of my insight today. Indus Waters Treaty, Foundation for Peace and Security in South Asia. A foreign, legal and humanitarian perspectives. They can be flawlessly applied to every word of this title and highlight an importance of the Foundation for Peace and security retention in South Asia. Unfortunately, Indus waters bring different sound and meaning of these principles for India, that has unilaterally suspended the 66-year-old Indus Waters Treaty with Pakistan since last year's conflict in Pahalgam in April 2025, escalating a long-standing bilateral dispute and raising concerns over legal and humanitarian perspectives for sustaining peace and security in the South Asia. Indian history said on the 5th of June that treaty would stay suspended until Pakistan completely stops cross-border terrorism. It appears as provocative and aggressive as the statement of the India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi that blood and water cannot flow together. It is his signature policy stance linking India's water sharing rights with Pakistan to cross-border terrorism. It asserts that India will not continue standard diplomatic cooperation and resource sharing while enduring violent attacks. Recently, the Union Minister of Water Resources, Mr. Patel, stated that the Indian government is actively working to ensure that not a single drop of water will go to Pakistan in the coming years. This rhetoric poisons not just the sacred Indus waters, but the very ground of the international law. The Indus Waters Treaty governs the use of the rivers in the Indus Basin, which is shared by India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and China. Under the agreement, India has unrestricted access to the basin's eastern rivers, while Pakistan receives rights to the western rivers. Every 9 in every 10 Pakistanis live within the Indus Basin today. Its rivers irrigate more than 90% of the country's crops and generate most of its hydroelectric power. All 21 of Pakistan's hydroelectric plants are located within the basin, and they are load-bearing pillars of a fragile economy that is in need of being technologically boosted and secured. India doesn't even need to cut all flows to inflict damage to Pakistan. Manipulating the timing of releases from dams on the western rivers could flood Pakistani farmland during planting seasons, while withholding water during critical irrigation windows could devastate harvests. Pakistan has already written to India twice in 2025 and once in May 2026 about abnormal, abrupt flow variations of the Chenab. Therefore, an opportunity to settle the issue through dialogue and diplomacy is reducing day after day. In the short term, reduced India-Pakistan coordination on river flow data, forecasting and technical communication will likely increase uncertainty and crisis volatility without significantly limiting actual water flows. In the longer term, potential upstream infrastructure expansion and climate stress could increase structural instability and intensify crisis dynamics between the two nuclear states. In fact, India is seeking to weaponize water through infrastructure projects. And it was mentioned very correctly by my colleague that it's not a conversation about a single dam or construction. We are talking about the whole cluster of illegal constructions there, breaking the legal framework of the Indus Treaty waters. This follows remarks in April by Pakistan's Planning Minister Ahsan Iqbal that the country had only about 90 days of water storage capacity. This falls well below regional and global benchmarks, with regional economies typically maintaining more than 120 days of storage and the global benchmark standing at roughly 300 days. Cutting flows would have serious implications for Pakistan's agriculture and overall economy, but any project would take several years before it has an impact. Pakistan has previously said it would consider any attempt to change the flow of cross-border waterways as an act of war, saying that the 160 treaty remained in force as there was no mechanism to unilaterally withdraw from it. It had also urged the UN Security Council to take up the dispute over the Indus Waters Treaty, warning that India's continuous unilateral suspension of the treaty carries grave peace and security as well as humanitarian consequences for the whole South Asia. We should remember, all of us, that internationally the Indus Waters Treaty is widely celebrated and recognized as one of the most durable transboundary water sharing mechanisms in history, brokered by the World Bank and established as a framework that successfully insulated vital resource management from broader geopolitical hostility for over 6 decades. There is a global perspective on the Indus Water Treaty, which is defined by several key elements or pillars. First of all, this treaty should stay in consideration with a separation over integration. What does it mean? Unlike treaties that require joint management of an entire river, the Indus Waters Treaty essentially separated or divorced the river systems. It allocated the 3 eastern rivers, Ravi, Bias and Sutlej, entirely to India, and the 3 western rivers, Indus, Jhelum and Chenab, to Pakistan. This separation is the key reason for its long-term resilience. The treaty also created the Permanent Indus Commission, which mandates regular commissioner meetings. This channel is a vital conflict management mechanism that survived multiple full-scale wars and prolonged diplomatic frictions between India and Pakistan. The Indus Waters Treaty stands as a strong pillar of the multilateral mediation power. It provided a formalized 3-step dispute resolution pattern involving Permanent Indus Commission, neutral experts, and the Court of Arbitration. However, we should keep in mind that the Indus Waters Treaty shouldn't be viewed as a division of waters, as it was the case of division of land during the partition of 1947, but rather as a mode of cooperation on water sharing. At the edge of the New World Order settlement, the very idea of division and hostile hegemony, as dangerous and non-perspective as the extreme unification of the ultra-global liberalism. While promoting the unilateral actions and international law violation, Indian policymakers are undermining their authority and title of the reliable and privileged partner within BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Blood and water doesn't flow together, but blood consists of 92% of water. You can't split it. You can only spill it. The Indus Waters Treaty has proved to be an outstanding example of cooperation between Pakistan and India for the whole global community over the past 6 decades. And all the attempts to demolish it due to geopolitical ambitions of India appear to be a highly vicious provocation and stance against fragile stability in the South Asia, which is tightly linked with the whole architecture of security in the Middle East. Being a strategic partner of Israel, India has taken a destructive path towards violent transboundary expansion of its national interest and goals by the means of ultimatums, dictatorship, and warmongering. Increasing Pakistani needs and the continuing building of hydropower dams by India on the western rivers Chenab may further threaten the treaty, which has no exit strategy. Water issue is a core issue between the two countries because, first of all, it is related to the disputed Jammu and Kashmir issue, and secondly, Pakistan is dependent on the single river basin, which its economy, agriculture and energy needs to rely on. The regional text of the Indus Waters Treaty lacks adaptive management strategies for emerging global issues such as accelerating climate change, changing hydrological patterns, and population growth. The unilateral actions of India can provoke an erosion of international norms. Unilateral changes threaten fundamental tenets of the customary international law, the principles of equitable and reasonable utilization, and the obligation not to cause significant harm. Powerful nation, or we have decided not to name India a powerful nation, conditionally powerful nations may utilize or bypass legal space to legitimize structural asymmetries, framing water access projects strictly through national security rather than shared responsibility. Undoubtedly, interference with cross-border flows is viewed as a direct threat to survival and economic stability of the affected populations. It can create critical and cause actually humanitarian challenges. Its health and sanitation problem. Upstream pollution or water diversions directly impact the drinking water and sanitation safety of downstream communities. It affects livelihoods and food security of Pakistan. Therefore, all sorts of unilateral actions of India, such as constructing dams or shrinking water supplies, threaten food security and economic stability of Pakistan. The Indus Waters Treaty Dispute Resolution Mechanism undoubtedly should be modernized according to the changing environmental and demographic realities on both sides of the border to bring it move in line with contemporary international water course law that defines the use and conservation of all waters that cross international boundaries, including both surface and ground waters. However, taking into consideration that there is no strong political will from the side of India to make joint management of the Indus Basin possible without weaponization of the issue, there is a need to reassess the very ground from the perspective of Pakistan's rights to protect its national interest, geo-economic, humanitarian sustainability, such as launching an Islamabad Indus Waters Global Forum. I think that this seminar can become a beginning of this process that can help to address to the broader international audience the importance, significance and inevitability of resolving this issue. Definitely, India tries to undermine significant pillars of the security architecture in the region of South Asia. By demolishing Indus Waters Treaty, it wishes to change the geopolitical course in its favor by the hybrid forms of violating geostrategic balance and geoeconomic stability in the South Asia, while creating obstacles and hurdles on the way of Pakistan to become an important regional player. It targets to create multiple red lines for Pakistan in order to prevent its expansion of its presence and influence in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and possible entrance to the BRICS format. Pakistan has all the authorities, all the capacities and a strong political will to show when those red lights start and where they may end, as there is an undeniable stance. Indus waters do not drift backwards. They flow equally for both parties, being the vital blood vascular system for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Zigon, for her insightful remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we have very limited time for questions and answers, so I'll...
Thank you, everyone. We're now going to open the floor for questions and comments. May I request you...
turn this off.
Oh. Can you all hear me? There we go. We're going to open the floor for some questions and comments. Just a couple of things that I request from you. If you could briefly introduce yourself, and where possible, if you could direct your question to one of our lovely speakers. I'm going to request our chair, Mr. Khurramdastia, to kindly moderate the Q&A session, please.
Do we have any inquisitive mind to ask questions from our distinguished panelists? There is one. Please introduce yourself and please be brief.
I will be brief. I am Abdullah Khan, Managing Director, Pakistan Institute for Conflict and Security Studies. My question is from the Commissioner of Indus Water Treaty. You said in your presentation that India has stopped cooperating with Pakistan since 2023. So what was your Commission and the government of Pakistan doing during this period? And my second question is from Ahmad Bilal Sufi Saab. That as per international law, and Dr. Musaddiq Malik has also highlighted that downstream countries have a legitimate right on the rivers. But we have given a right of 3 rivers to India, all kind of rights, and they have diverted that. So don't you think that India has provided us to reclaim our right on the eastern 3 rivers? If India is running away from this treaty, so why should not we claim the lost rivers which we had lost to India in 1960? Thank you very much.
Commissioner Shah, if you will respond, please.
So your question is that, what the Commission was doing when they stopped cooperating under the framework of the treaty. So I just want to share with you that basically there is a background of this non-cooperation from the Indian side because Pakistan started the arbitral proceedings back in 2016, which were paused by the World Bank for 6 good or bad years. And eventually, in the month of November 2022, the bank constituted the Court of Arbitration. And as a consequence of the empanelment of the Court of Arbitration, which India felt that it is going to be, not very positive to protect the India's interest. So therefore, they stopped the cooperation. And fortunately, by that time, Pakistan's commission as well as the government of Pakistan was in front of the Court of Arbitration. And our first and foremost duty was to place all the record, cooperation, non-cooperation, semi-cooperation before the Court of Arbitration and try to convince the Court of Arbitration that this court has been constituted through a due process and it has all the jurisdiction. And we succeeded. And we received the first award of the court on its competence, in which one of the arguments was this basically non-cooperation from the Indian side. And the court said, court basically rejected all 6 objections by India on the court itself. And it basically recognized that the court has the jurisdiction, it was duly constituted, and the treaty framework is valid. So this is what the Commission was doing. So this was first part of your question. I think second is for you.
Thank you, Shahzad. Mr. Sufi.
Very much for your question. Reclaiming the rivers, if I were to frame it legally, we clearly moved to our disadvantage while agreeing to let waters of 3 western rivers come to us, and the eastern rivers were given. So we call it in legal formulation that a country, when entering into a contract, moved to its disadvantage. If the contract is now being argued as not existing, then you rightly say there are 3 things then with Pakistan can look at or do. First is the reclaiming, subject to adjustments of the rivers. Second is that we can now object to each and every project which they are making. Earlier, these projects that was shown on the map by Meher Ali Shah Sahab, each of this project is now causing a threat of if the upper riparian wants to starve the lower riparian or interrupt the water, divert it, or cause any discomfort or break the political will, which is the war aim. So they're converting them into military objectives. So in other words, you now have the right to object on construction, tendering, identifying, planning of every site that is coming up, because the guarantee of IWT from their side does not exist. And lastly, since we negotiated this treaty between India and Pakistan, traditionally every state through which a river flows has a locus standi into it. So China, in my view, needs to be part of Pakistan's specific discussions because it commences from there. And if you look at Mekong, Danube, and all other rivers, the tradition is all riparians through which the river is running, they are parties to that arrangement.
Thank you very much. There's one more question. I'm afraid that's the last one we can take.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm Dr. Fayaz from NEST. My question is from Ahmed Bilal Sufi Sahab. Sir, about 10 years back, I conducted your interview, and that was on Indus Water Treaty. And we talked about, that was climate proofing Indus Water Treaty, an instrument of peace building in South Asia. That was the context. And you categorically mentioned that we need to have an addendum instead of renegotiating treaty. But now, after 10 years, and what has happened, the way treaty has transpired as a victim of hydropolitics, do you really hold your opinion to the same very concept, or you think there should be some variance to that very thought process? Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr. Sufi.
Sir, thank you very much. I think I'm not averse to that, even as of today. If India wants to sit on the table and say they have certain concerns, we also have some concerns in respect of treaty. So whether we call it addendum or an additional protocol, these are the options which should be on the table from Pakistan's side. I mean, if I were to be advising anyone, I would say, yes, go ahead and have a session on this. We have our concerns as well, and some of the concerns are that we highlighted earlier. So my position stays the same, but I'm very upset with the belligerency shown over a period of time. 10 years ago, when Mr. Modi announced that he will do this, we thought it was just a rhetoric. But he set up a task force, and that task force comprised of various international lawyers, and they came out with 5th August 2019 formulation, and now they have done this, which is unheard of. So it's a belligerency from the other side that discourages you. Otherwise, legal diplomacy, addendum options, and multiple other options are open in my reckoning. It's subject to the, I will say, the political government's will on it, but my own position remains the same.
One more question has been requested, so, Madam.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Minister. First of all, my compliments to the panel for, excellent presentations. But taking advantage of such an illustrious panel, I will ask, the devil's advocate. The question is that if India actually builds a dam, what is the actual liability which we can impose on them? Is there any structure which is available in it? One. And number two, how would that translate into an act of war? And if so, how far do you see the legal options resulting into military warfare? I know it's the chair's discretion not to respond on it, but considering your background in defense, maybe if you could also elaborate a bit on it. And one added small question to Roxana. you talked about a forum for Indus water. If you could, briefly, spell that out, how do you think that forum is going to help, and whether or not that can become a starting point for interactions with the SCO? Dr. Maria Sultan from South Asian Strategic Stability Institute University.
Professor Zigon, if you wish to respond, and we will take the other question.
Dear Dr. Maria Sultan, thank you very much for your question. First of all, I'm grateful that you have been attentively absorbing all the information or statements and offers, proposals that have been made directly and between the lines in my speech. And intentionally, I didn't highlight the idea of organizing Indus Water Treaty, Islamabad Indus Water Treaty Global Forum in a specific sector of discussion, because I wanted this idea to mature. To be honest with you, I think Pakistan has reached a historical momentum. It has achieved a tremendous breakthrough in a diplomatic domain. It has managed and succeeded to convert a long-standing negative perception of Pakistan in the global media as a country which has been marked and primarily marked by hostile neighbor India, which has been promoting the idea that Pakistan is a hub of terrorism, is a place which is not worthy of considering in a global world order construction. But what a surprise, has broken the plans of India after an incredible diplomatic success and breakthrough of Pakistan, which has stood up front with Islamabad peace talks and has successfully managed as a peace moderator, peace broker, in order to completely reshuffle the geopolitical and geostrategic perception of Pakistan, not only in the region of South Asia and Middle East, but in the perception of the global audience. And I think that's a very important pretext and incentive in order to connect these two successful diplomatic endeavors and steps that have been made by Pakistan, including the seminar on Indus Water Treaty, which I actually combine in very strong logics. And that logics dictates me to come up with a proposal of going further. And as my colleagues have correctly mentioned, that issue is not actually concerning only Pakistan. China should take a really important, significant role in this dispute mediation, as well as Russia. And I truly believe that if Islamabad Indus Water Treaty will take a format of the global forum, it can become a really important initiative that Pakistan can bring on the round table of discussion and reflection in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And logically, as the next step, when this global forum will attract immense attention, and I think that Pakistan should address that issue also to the countries of the Gulf states, because they also have a scarce resource of water. It's a great concern for them as well. So, and the next step can be as addressing this issue to the countries of BRICS. Therefore, I strongly believe that if Pakistan follows for all those achievements that it has reached by today, I think it's logically that that format of global forum will be given a chance. Thank you.
Dr. Maria, I shall use the chair's privilege and duck your question, and thereby bringing this session to a conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, we have benefited immeasurably from the insights of the Indus Waters Commissioner Meher Ali Shah, my dear friend Amir Bilal Sufi, Professor Roxalana Zigon, and of course the impassioned discourse of Dr. Mosaddeq Malik. Please give them all a big hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our audience members for not only listening very carefully to what our guests have to say, but also asking engaging questions. I'd like to now invite our session chair, Mr. Khurram Dasti Khan, to deliver his conclusions on today's session.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm delighted to acknowledge the presence of my distinguished former colleague in the Cabinet and the National Assembly and the Chairman of Pakistan People's Party, Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, and of course another very valued colleague, Ms. Hina Rabbani Kar, who has been the Foreign Minister and currently chairs the National Assembly Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs. My dear friend Atta Tarar is not momentarily here, but thank you, Mr. Tarar, for this kind invitation, and of course my appreciation to Institute of Regional Studies and Ambassador George Salim for always dragging me to these things in which I'm a willing victim. Ladies and gentlemen, I begin by quoting the American writer Henry Thoreau, who said that the life in us is like the water in the river. The life in us is like the water in the river, and therefore I'm here to argue for living rivers. And I'm also here to prosecute those who threaten a civilization, who have contempt for international law, and who choke rivers to punish and coerce humanity. And what I'm prosecuting today is that India has weaponized water. What does this mean? We have heard from more than one distinguished panelists that on 25th of April 2025, India unilaterally put in abeyance the Indus Waters Treaty, a treaty that has survived four full-scale wars and 65 years of unbroken enmity between two nuclear power neighbors. So the treaty has some resilience, had some resilience until it was put into abeyance, which Mr. Sufi has told us is a legally meaningless concept because it doesn't exist in the treaty. But they didn't just put the treaty in abeyance, ladies and gentlemen. After the abeyance came the threats. And I want to quote exactly what was said. The Indian Water Minister said, "We will ensure that not a single drop of Indus water flows into Pakistan." The Interior Minister, Amit Shah, said a month later, "No, Indus Waters Treaty will never be restored." Mr. Patil, Mr. Shah's boss, Prime Minister Modi, first said in 2016, has repeated since, and Professor Zigo quoted it, that blood and water cannot flow together. But they didn't just make the threats once. They have repeated the threat. The Water Minister, Mr. Patil, has repeated this, and External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has very recently confirmed what the Interior Minister said, that Indus Waters Treaty will not be restored. And to those who said that India hasn't acted on its threat, I have only one slide, if you can put this on, of a list of actions that India has taken. If the computer guy is awake, otherwise I will just read out what is there. The next one, please. Next slide. Yes. So this is a list of actions to answer those that India hasn't said or done anything since it put the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance. That was on April 23rd, 2025. In the next 2 days, India cut off all hydrological data and flood warnings. Then it went on in which it announced a three-pronged water denial strategy for all western rivers. And on May 4th and 5th, ladies and gentlemen, I think it is worth paying some attention to, the Baglihar dam gates were closed, which reduced flow in the Chenab River by 90%. I think it was mentioned earlier. Also, on May the 5th, the Salal dam gates get closed. In May 2025, again on the Chenab, they flushed the reservoir. Then it goes on and on. But the important thing is that India has, in the last year, has continued to take actions to stop and divert Pakistan's water in the western rivers. It continues to make threatening remarks and for a very real effect, I think we can see the August-September 2025 incident when its dam gates were released without advance notice on the eastern rivers, which is Ravi, Chenab and Sutlej, and nearly 4.7 million Pakistanis were affected by that flood when those rivers were opened without warning. So India has acted on its threat, and the same incident that I just quoted when India decided to stop the flow of water on the Chenab River, a senior Indian government official told the Indian Express newspaper, and again I want to be precise in quoting that official, unnamed Indian official, he said that this stopping the flow of water was, and I quote, a punitive action. By doing this, even if the choke is for a short while, we demonstrate that we will take coercive steps. The Chenab River irrigates Punjab farmlands, and Pakistan needs to realize we mean to punish them on all fronts. So this is the policy of the government of India. Choke, punish, coerce. And punishing and coercing the human beings who drink from these rivers and the flora and fauna irrigated by these rivers. 200 million people choked, punished and coerced, not for what they did, but for what their government is accused of without any evidence. The Indian Home Minister, I want to complete his remarks, because he did not even bother with euphemism. After declaring that India will never restore the Indus Waters Treaty, he continued on, he said, and I quote, "We will take water that was flowing to Pakistan to Rajasthan by constructing a canal, and Pakistan will be starved of water that it has been getting unjustifiably." So it is his word, starved. So the government of India has declared publicly and starkly its intention to starve a neighboring population of water. And ladies and gentlemen, let that sit beside the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which recognizes water as a fundamental human right. Let it sit beside the Geneva Conventions. Let it sit beside every principle of civilized international conduct that humanity has built at such terrible cost over the last century. So Pakistan's legal position in this case is not merely strong, it is grounded unassailably in international law and has been expressed trenchantly by speakers in this session. But I just want to quote one sentence from the Court of Arbitration in its finding in June 2025. It said the treaty does not provide for unilateral abeyance and reaffirmed its jurisdiction. India's response that it declared the court illegal and refused to participate. Ladies and gentlemen, here is what is to note, that when a state loses the legal argument and responds by disavowing the court, the state has confessed its own guilt. And then what to note is the Article 62 of the Vienna Convention, which states that political tensions, including terrorism, do not constitute a fundamental change of circumstances that alters the treaty's water-sharing purpose. And I think this was said most clearly by the International Court of Justice in its 1997 Gabčíkovo-Nožmoroš judgment on the rights to waters of the Danube between Hungary and Slovakia. If you'll put on the previous slide, please. Pichli slide pe le jaye. Yeah. So this is actually a very relevant case, the Gabčíkovo-Nožmoroš judgment, because it's almost maps precisely what is Pakistan's case. But it's not just this case. There's also the UN Waters Convention of 1997, which mandates equitable and reasonable utilization and no significant harm. India's weaponization of water could also amount to collective punishment against international humanitarian law. It is prohibited under the Geneva Conventions. And the threat of mass starvation, that's why the words are important, because the threat of mass starvation is potentially a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. The Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Isaaq said recently that 17 projects by India in the Indus River system would give New Delhi the tools for hydro-hegemony. So Pakistan's case is made. The verdict, under any honest reading of international law, is already written. India stands condemned. But, ladies and gentlemen, I want to go beyond the legal, because the law ultimately is the floor of our obligations to one another. It is not the ceiling. So India putting the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance is not attacking merely a document. It is not attacking a bureaucratic arrangement, which you can say the Indus Waters Commission is a bureaucratic arrangement. What India is attacking is a living basin of rivers upon which 200 million Pakistanis depend for their lives. So these are not abstract statistics. These are farmers in Punjab whose wheat feeds a nation. These are mothers in Sindh whose children drink from channels fed by Himalayan rivers hundreds and miles away. These are fishermen whose entire livelihood is built around the river. The great Yale professor, James Scott, wrote last year in a book that he published that rivers on a long view are alive. They are born, they change, they shift their channels, they forge new routes to the sea, they move both gradually and violently, they can teem with life, they may die a quasi-natural death, they are frequently maimed and even murdered. Maimed and murdered. I do not think Professor Scott used those words lightly. And what we have seen in the same year that he published his book, that when India threatens to throttle the Indus system, it does not merely violate a treaty, it is a murder threat. By murdering a river basin, India's armed hand transgresses into millions of Pakistani houses and pulls the trigger. The Cambridge scholar Robert Macfarlane also argues that rivers are alive. And he cites Canada, where rivers have been recognized legally as living beings. But the case that is, I think, most intriguing was the 2017 Te Awa Tupua Act in New Zealand, which recognized the Wanganui River as not only alive, but a legal person, giving it the same legal standing as citizen. Professor Macfarlane insists that we stop using the word "it" for rivers, because he believes that that mode of address reduces rivers to the status of objects and mere stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indus is not stuff. The Chenab is not stuff. The Jhelum is not stuff. The rivers of the Indian Basin are not stuff. They are the soul of our soil. So I address and conclude by calling upon the citizens of the world who believe in international law. Pakistan calls upon the international community that every state that has signed the UN Charter, every institution that claims to uphold the law of nations, to act, and to act by holding India accountable. Let the believers in international law uphold and defend the principle that water cannot be weaponized, that water treaties cannot be dissolved by the stronger party because the mood suits them, that 200 million Pakistani lives are not bargaining chips. The Indus has flowed for 10,000 years. It has nurtured the Indus Valley civilization, which is one of the oldest and most sophisticated human societies ever to grace the earth. The Indus Valley civilization came into being and flourished long before Delhi or any other capital existed. So Professor Scott understood something that India's warmongers do not. A river is not a pipe. You cannot turn it on and off as political theater demands. And as Mr. Sufi told us so ably, there are no titles to rivers. The Indus Basin rivers do not belong to India. The rivers belong to the millions of lives they sustain, and not just human life. Our understanding of rivers must expand to encompass their entirety and the deep geology, from tributaries, wetlands, floodplains, backwaters, eddies, marshlands, sindhs, mangroves, to the entire assemblage of life forms, the fish and the silt and the reed beds and the migratory beds dependent upon the rivers for their existence. Ladies and gentlemen, India cannot put any river in abeyance. It cannot hold water hostage. It cannot starve its civilization into compliance. It cannot wield rivers as weapons, because the Indus and the Jhelum and the are alive. And India is trying to kill these living beings. And Pakistan has decided, we will protect our rivers. We will protect life and civilization. Ladies and gentlemen, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah built a nation on this soil. But our rivers have written, are writing this moment, and will write this soil's autobiography with their flow. So I urge the world, let them flow. Our people and their armed forces have defended this soil in 4 wars. We will fight hegemony in all forms, hydro or otherwise. And we will fight this war on this soil if need be, but we seek peace. And we will take our case in the international courts and councils. We will take our case for water and life in the court of world opinion. And we will take our case for water and life to the souls of conscientious citizens everywhere, until weaponization of water is condemned and outlawed, international law is restored, and justice flows as freely as the rivers that nurture the Indus civilization. Let them flow. Thank you very much. Pakistan Paindawad.
This is Umar Khalid Butt from Pakistan TV. I am joining you all from the Jinnah Convention Center.
इस वक्त आप मनाजिर देख रहे हैं बैनुल-अक़वामी सेमिनार के, जो कि इस्लामाबाद में मुनक्किद है सिंतास मुआहदे के हवाले से। और वफाकी वज़ीर खुर्रम दस्तगीर इस सेमिनार से खिताब कर रहे थे। उन्होंने कहा कि अफ़वाद पाकिस्तान ने 4 जंगों में मादरे वतन का कामयाबी से दिफा किया है। और साथ ही साथ उन्होंने कहा कि जो अब तक फुल स्केल वॉर्स हुई हैं उसमें भी ये ट्रीटी ने सर्वाइव किया, लेकिन अब जब ये इंसिडेंट हुआ तो उसके बाद भारत की जानिब से जारहियत अपनाई गई और सिंतास मुआहदे को एक तरफा तौर पर मुअत्तल किया गया। 2025 से भारत सिंतास मुआहदे की मुसलसल खिलाफ वर्जी कर रहा है और पाकिस्तान के अवाम का दरियाए सिंध के पानी पर पूरा हक है। भारत ने पाकिस्तान का पानी रोका तो भरपूर जवाब दिया जाएगा, इस अज़म का इजहार किया जा रहा है। और साथ ही साथ उन्होंने कहा कि भारत मशरकी दरियाओं में बगैर इतला भी पानी छोड़ देता है। भारत पानी रोककर पाकिस्तानी अवाम को मुसलसल नुकसान पहुँचा रहा है। पानी हर शहरी का बुनियादी हक है और उसे उसका हक मिलना चाहिए। भारत सिंतास मुआहदे को एक तरफा तौर पर मुअत्तल नहीं कर सकता। वफाकी वज़ीर खुर्रम दस्तगीर की जानिब से यह भी कहा गया कि पानी रोककर ग़िज़ाई किल्लत से दो चार करना आलमी जुर्म है। भारत 24 करोड़ पाकिस्तानियों की ज़िंदगी को ख़तरे में डाल रहा है। आलमी बरादरी पानी को बतौर हथियार इस्तेमाल होने से रोके। साथ ही साथ उन्होंने कहा कि पाकिस्तान हर सूरत अपने हिस्से की पानी की हिफाजत करेगा और इससे पहले इस इसी सेमिनार से वफाकी वज़ीर इत्तलात भी खिताब कर रहे थे। उनकी जानिब से कहा गया कि पाकिस्तान के लिए पानी महज एक कुदरती वसीला नहीं बल्कि बका का मामला है। दरियाए सिंध के पानी के तहफ़्फ़ुज़ के लिए हर तरीका अपनाएंगे। ज़राअत कौमी मईशत का बुनियादी सुतून और दरियाए सिंध उसकी शाहरग है। हम एक मुआहदे पर नहीं बल्कि 24 करोड़ अवाम की शाहरग पर बात कर रहे हैं। पाकिस्तान ने हमेशा पुरअमन रवाबे, तामीरी मुज़ाकरात और मुआहदे पर मुखलिसाना अमल दरामद के अज़्म का मुज़ाहरा किया। भारत ने इस मुआहदे को एकतरफ़ा तौर पर मुअत्तल किया। सिंध-तास मुआहदे में तरमीम या इसे मुअत्तल करना मुमकिन नहीं। पाकिस्तान हर सूरत इस मुआहदे के तकद्दुस का तहफ़्फ़ुज़ करेगा। न्यूज़ स्टूडियो से फिल वक्त इतना ही।
मम्मा, पेट में बहुत दर्द है। कैविटी है क्या? मैं स्कूल कैसे जाऊंगा?
आज फिर स्कूल छोड़ो।
ओके मम्मा।
तुम ना एक्टिंग स्कूल जाओ।
हर माँ जानती है